So I'm now pleased to turn it over to John Solaric. Gallagher is a longtime RegEd client, and we've enjoyed our partnership for more than a decade. The firm has implemented RegEd's enterprise exchange solution in a managed services model, and John is going to talk about Gallagher's licensing operations and their evolution. So John, to start out, I see the slide on the screen here. Tell us a bit about Gallagher and how it's situated in the industry.
Certainly. Thanks very much, Carlin. Thanks very much, Deborah. I appreciate everyone giving me the opportunity to talk today. Gallagher is almost 100 years old. We're headquartered in Rolling Meadows, which is just a little bit southwest of Chicago. We have subsidiaries cutting across multiple disciplines and across multiple geographies, but our core business is in insurance brokerage and risk management services. Hopefully in 2020, we will actually exceed the $7 billion in revenue that's referenced there. And I think as things stand today, we're right around 32,000 employees. One thing I did want to add is I found it very, very interesting, and this is going to be a theme cutting across my discussion, is I think the first bullet point on the first slide in Carlin's presentation talked about acquisition integration. And through my topics that I'm going to discuss here, acquisition integration is going to be an overriding theme because it's something that's part of Gallagher's DNA, as they say, and it's something that we take into consideration every day with respect to how we properly integrate our acquisition partners.
Fantastic.
Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, and John, it's interesting, you and I have spoken a number of times. Being with Gallagher with oversight for broker licensing for more than 13 years puts you in a really unique position to talk about how Gallagher has evolved their licensing operations over the last decade. So how did it look at Gallagher Global Brokerage back in 2010, and what were some of the challenges?
Well, one of the things that's unique to my situation, Deborah, that you mentioned a moment ago, and my guess is there's some people in the audience who are in similar situations, is you folks may have noticed that my title is VP of Finance and Accounting Operations. So the licensing/compliance word never has been in my title. So I kind of stumbled upon this about 13 years ago at Gallagher, and true to what Carlin mentioned a moment ago, one of the things that I did immediately was I looked inward. And I said, well, we've got this licensing challenge. Do we have the horses? Do we have the expertise? Do we have the ability to do this ourselves? And remember, we were still trying to define what this was. But I quickly learned after looking inward, and I'll go through the prior situation, we really knew that we didn't have the horses to take this on. So while we did have a centralized licensing operation, it was supported with email, an Access database, Microsoft Excel, probably pieces of paper that were stuffed in people's drawers, things like that with respect to our centralized licensing operation. We ultimately then, though, allowed some of our branches, and these are our acquisition partners, to opt out of using this centralized service and allow them to do their licensing on their own. Well, eventually, with our being always in an acquisition mode, the number of branches that opted out and handled it themselves outnumbered the number of branches that were being managed by the centralized team. So really calling it a centralized team was a misnomer because it was centralized, but we didn't even handle the bulk of the licensing work within this central team. Again, piggybacking on something that Carlin said with respect to the complexity is many of the states with respect to our excess and surplus lines filings, which is a huge part of our business, still require paper checks. That function was also performed by this centralized licensing operation. So they clearly weren't specialized in one particular function. We had them doing some ancillary, albeit related functions. So ultimately, the very easy decision for us was we decided to outsource our licensing operations to a small managed services provider down in the southern part of the United States. It was done more out of urgency as opposed to true core necessity because we knew we were challenged with what our current state was, to put it bluntly. So what were some of the challenges that we faced? As I mentioned, our licensure data wasn't all in one place. It was siloed. It was scattered across the country within our branches. We really didn't know how well our individual branches who decided to do their own licensing were doing. We couldn't readily identify licensed brokers for specific jurisdictions. So somebody who happened to be in a branch in Los Angeles, California, who needed a partner who had the appropriate licenses to cover risk in Florida, didn't have the visibility into what some of their other partner brokers had in terms of licenses. So there was that visibility that was lacking. Not all brokers were maintaining their licenses per proper standards, creating exposure for lapsed licenses. While the responsibility was at the broker level or at the branch level, as everybody knows, the risk associated with non-compliance was at the Gallagher level. So we recognized very, very quickly the risk to which we exposed our company, and we knew we had to address that very, very quickly. Again, as Carlin mentioned, we found that we really had difficulty both in the centralized team level as well as the branch level, that finding and hiring and training licensing experts was a huge challenge. So we really didn't have the ability to quickly replace the people who had all this relevant institutional knowledge and subject matter expertise at the drop of a hat. We were finding it very difficult to do. The next piece, the check cutting cycle was the process by which we actually reimbursed our vendor. And being a finance and accounting guy, that was one of the first things that I recognized, is that our accounting controls with respect to invoicing and payments of those invoices were very, very loose. So that was something we definitely needed to address very, very quickly. And then this is a very, very important point that I want to make here, is again, focusing on Gallagher's growth and Gallagher's acquisition integration strategy. Our previous vendor couldn't scale operations quickly enough to keep up with us. And one of the things, we'll talk about it in a moment, but we weren't necessarily looking for a partner who could keep up with us. We were really looking for a partner who could stay ahead of us. And that's a key differentiator with respect to what our blank piece of paper looked like when we put down what some of the things were that we were looking for. We really didn't want to have to spend a lot of time making sure that our vendor kept up with us. We wanted that relationship to kind of go in the other direction and have the vendor come to us and say, John, these are the wonderful things that we're doing to get out ahead of some of the things that we know are core to your business. We can move to the next slide. So our envisioned future state. This is where we sat down with a blank piece of paper and said, what do we want this relationship to look like? Remember, we already looked inward and determined this wasn't anything that we wanted to spend time doing in-house, but we did want to make sure we had a technology-based front end, right? We had to have an easy-to-use gateway for both a core team of stakeholders as well as any type of licensee that we had in a branch who could have easy access to their information, as well as the depth and breadth of Gallagher's licensing population across the board. So we did want our operations managed by a vendor who was a partner, somebody, again, that we were going to grow with and who could stay ahead of what Gallagher was doing. And we did want this to be a true partnership. And by partnership, periodic conference calls, discussions about our future, acquisition integration strategy, those things that we knew were upcoming that our licensing vendor had to be part of. Another piece of this is, and this is also very important, we really wanted to remove the burden of credentialing and renewing from our brokers. What do we want our licensee population to be spending their time doing? We want them to be selling insurance and servicing our clients. So with a particular licensee, a licensee has 100 things to do in a particular day. What we didn't want to see is license renewal in that top 100. We wanted to make sure that our population really didn't have to spend any time on the credentialing and renewal process. We also wanted to allow our stakeholders to quickly identify who had which license types across all jurisdictions. So that helps with our acquisition integration strategy, because as our acquisition partners come in, we do a licensing review and determine whether or not they're over-licensed or under-licensed. And having visibility into the entire population of licensees allows us to very, very quickly and very, very easily to do that determination. And then lastly, with respect to the accounting side of things, we wanted to have technology that identified each licensing transaction by licensing type and by individual branch, so that ultimately that information could be tracked, uploaded into our accounting system, and easily allocating the cost of those transactions to our individual business units at the press of a button. So the licensing responsibility and the associated management we took away from the branches, but the associated cost, the amount of money that they were spending on the licenses, we wanted to make sure we were able to allocate that cost and also include it in any type of budget or expense management conversations that they have. So we were very, very easily able to include the business unit into the RegEd database that allowed us to report and track everything down to the business unit level.
Yeah, John, out of what you just pointed to in the envisioned future state, I think the thing that we hear all of this from other large brokerages, but the thing that we hear probably the most is the whole idea of removing the burden of credentialing and renewals from brokers. There's a big focus on that, and it becomes even more important when, as Carlin talked about and as you mentioned, M&A is a constant, in the backdrop, and you have to constantly onboard and make sure that those folks are ready to sell. So we do hear that a lot. Sure. Now, going to implementation, when Gallagher decided to advance their licensing operations to support the firm's evolving needs, how did you actually go about the evaluation?
So we ultimately tapped into some of the expertise that we had on the team. We contacted some of our branches and said, we're considering doing this outsourcing exercise. Give us names. Give us names of entities, firms, partners, brothers-in-law, whatever it may be, that that perform this service. We put together a pretty lengthy RFP. I think we sent it out to maybe 15 or 16 entities, got 10 responses, and then shortlisted it down to 2. Obviously, RegEd was one of those. And we invited those 2 entities to our headquarters at the time that was in Itasca, Illinois. And we basically put a group of stakeholders together within Gallagher and told the vendors what we were looking to accomplish and basically said, prove to us that you are the firm that can warrant Gallagher taking this ever-growing business and move it over to you as an outsourced service provider. So we went through a pretty extensive exercise over the course of about a year. Yeah.
And then I see on the screen right now, I was going to say on the screen you have the overview of the implementation. Would love to hear about it.
Yeah, certainly. So once we got to the final 2, it came down to making the final decision, and we decided with RegEd. We decided to go with RegEd for a couple of reasons, and these are the differentiators. We were very happy with the technology. As you see in the second bullet point, the integration with our HR system, the integration with our accounting system, that allows a lot of the manual, tedious, administrative type stuff to go away was a big differentiator. I would say the second differentiator was the process by which the transition would actually happen. So as I mentioned in a prior slide, we had things in Access databases, we had things in Excel, we had things in Outlook, we had things on paper in people's drawers. And we said, okay, final 2, show us your project plan. Show us how you are actually going to make this happen. And RegEd came to the table with a project plan with tasks and dates and dependencies and resource requirements, and most importantly, a time frame during which they said it was going to be done. We really didn't have the expertise associated with how to do such a huge integration from all these various disparate siloed pieces of information to a standard enterprise exchange database. And I would say that was probably the biggest worry on my desk, as well as the biggest concern across Gallagher, which was how are we going to seamlessly make this happen without putting individual business, individual producers, and this company at risk. And we were very, very happy with the way that process went. It went very, very smoothly. So the second piece of this, sorry, Deborah, go ahead. Did you have a question?
No, please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The second part of this is, the third bullet point that you see on the slide is, we wanted to make sure that while we had the visibility into all this wonderful data that we never had visibility into in the past, we wanted to make sure it was fresh and real time. And as you can see in the bullet point there, the data was refreshed nightly. All new agencies acquired through M&A would be quickly and seamlessly added to the firm's licensing databases. And again, this whole M&A theme across Gallagher is recurring. When you are the acquiree, you've got not 100, a million different things that you have to take into consideration with respect to making sure everything goes smoothly with this acquisition. And really, we really wanted to make sure that our acquisition partners did not have to worry about the licensing piece. We inform them about how the licensing transition is going to work very, very early on in the process, and we tell them not to worry. And that's probably the biggest thing currently that we can tip our hat to say that goes really, really well. In my division, we probably do between 25 and 30 acquisitions per year. So on average, that's a couple of months. So this is not something we do once in a while. This is something we're doing as a normal course of business every single day. And it's really, really refreshing to know that our key people associated with the acquisition integration process, me, the operations folks, the finance folks, the sales folks, really don't have to spend any of their time on the licensing transition process. So that works out very, very well. And then to finalize that discussion point, RegEd developed a data schema to convert all the data that was in all those disparate places into a particular database that previously was in Access, Excel, whatever it may be. And I remember sitting down and going through all the reviews of the data accuracy and being very, very impressed with how little data was missed. Right? So we talked about 97, 98% accuracy, how many data points were missed. And as we continued to do the process, we went from 95 to 98 to 99.5. And we were very, very happy with the way that data transition actually worked, because it left us with a feeling of comfort that while we were worried about the data transition, we were more worried about putting our company at risk. And that's where we had a very, very extreme level of comfort that we weren't putting Gallagher at risk in terms of proper licensure and compliance.
Some complexity to that implementation, John. So talk a little bit about some of the most important benefits that Gallagher's realized since you implemented the exchange and also the outsourcing to RegEd's managed services group.
Yeah, so one of the questions that people ask me, and again, not being a licensing guy, being more of a finance and accounting guy, is, now, how do you know that RegEd's doing a good job? And I say very candidly, but also very bluntly, how many times does my phone ring? Right? How many times do issues come across my desk associated with licensing? And it's really very, very, very rare. So that leaves me with a level of comfort that the interaction between RegEd and our small licensing team and our head of compliance, and most importantly, our licensee population, is very, very seamless to the point where I really never hear anything. I also, to the first bullet point, I rarely hear anything associated with a particular license that didn't get non-renewed. Somebody left the company, they've retired, whatever it may be. Did we do everything we needed to do associated with the disassociations and those types of things? So it's not just the new licenses, it's not just the renewals, it's also the terms, and that's where the HR system integration becomes very, very important. Next bullet point, the credentialing associated with the branches to ensure they're properly credentialed for the business they place. I mean, at any point in time, what we can do is we can compare where we have business, and we look into our agency management systems to determine where we have business and where that associated risk is, and compare that to where we have licenses, down to the licensee and account manager level. So that allows us to independently have a level of comfort using RegEd's technology to ensure that at any particular time, we're really not exposing the company to risk in terms of proper licensure. The next piece of it, enable the firm to instantly identify licensure status in each jurisdiction. So one of the things we didn't have in the past was one of those difficult, complex placements where somebody in Idaho who has a client with exposure in Florida. And what that would mean for that producer in Idaho was they would literally have to pick up the phone and start dialing and say, look, I need some help with a placement in a jurisdiction where I don't have, or nobody in my branch has the proper licensing. How can I find out who those people are? Now we can find out that information with the touch of a button or one quick phone call, and we can provide a list of all the people who have that proper licensure in a state where the current producer is looking to place business. So that is one huge benefit. The timely disbursement of all state fees by RegEd, so the client receives a single bill each month. I realize from a licensing perspective, this may not be that important, but from an accounting perspective, this is wildly important to us. So we're able, with the press of a button, to allocate every penny of our licensing and state fees down to the business unit level at any particular time. We do it on a monthly basis, but this is wildly important because it allows our business unit managers to make sure that they are in line with what their budgets were from a licensing perspective. We do this on a monthly basis. So this allows that transparency at the P&L level for our branch manager population. The next bullet point really supports that, the clear accounting of all licensing costs by transaction and by branch. So we know where we're spending our licensing dollars, not necessarily at the branch level, but by service type level. So we get to see if our money is being spent on new licenses or renewals, and it's very, very easy to gain access into that information. And then the last point is, I touched on this earlier. You know, we were really struggling as people would leave the company. And again, some of these people had 30 years of institutional knowledge and licensing experience, and they were deciding to leave or retire or go to greener pastures. And we were really having difficulty finding people to come in and join us with that level of expertise. So that's a burden that we no longer have to address because of the complete outsourcing of the service.
John, thank you so much for sharing that very compelling case study. I'm sure that the webinar attendees today have gained some really good insights from it. Really, really appreciate it.